Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Horrifica. I hope you all had a fantastic winter break, no matter what kind of break you got. Hope you got to, virtually or otherwise, safely see your families. Now, I am back with my awesome videos, and this week I am hitting you up with a list of the 10 best horror movies of the 80s. This decade is known for horror, let's be honest. It has movie after movie. The slasher scene is really becoming its own. With titles like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, I had a really hard time finding the best picks. And as an extra at the end of this list, stick around for my top 5 least favorite horror movies of the 80s. It's a fun time. Now, without further ado, let's get to the list. We obviously have to start out with this film, or I know the comments will go crazy, and that would be 1980's Friday the 13th. This film is an amazingly written, suspenseful, and twisted piece. Sure, it has its fair share of memorable moments, memeable moments, I should say, and I do not condone the killing of live animals in a movie. Rest in peace, you poor snake. But these pale in comparison to the film's overall impact on the horror genre. Black Christmas and Halloween may have been the fuel to start the fire that is the slasher genre, but Friday the 13th lit that flame. There is another film that should never be forgotten that came out in 1980, and that is the masterpiece that is The Shining. This slow building and suspenseful psychological horror made an amazingly and crazy ride of a watch for the viewer. The actors were amazing, and though I do not support the treatment of Shelley Duvall on set, she really delivered a phenomenal performance. The, the movie was so beautifully scripted, even though I didn't fully follow the book or the vision that Stephen King had for it. Stanley Kubrick, though as questionable of a human being as he is from what I've seen from the documentaries about the film, really delivered a good, suspenseful, slow build psychological horror that you definitely need to watch if you're a new fan of horror. This next movie was also made in 1980, and that would be Maniac. Are y'all sensing a theme of a lot of slasher movies being on this list? Well, don't be surprised because this was the 80s and one of the most famous, if not the most famous decade for the slasher genre. So don't be surprised if more than half of this list is slasher-themed movies. If you like a classic slasher, then give Maniac a watch. It's got some great kills in it and some decent actors, so it's a fun time. Now, getting out of the 1980 itself, and going straight to 1982, I have to put the Slumber Party Massacre on this list. It is a great watch and is directed by a woman, so even though there's your expected gratuitous nudity for the male producers and investors in the movies, there is also a decent amount of female empowerment in its own right. Something that was not very expected or seen in movies at the time, especially in the horror genre. I mean, sure, we had the formula of the final girl, but women having men's jobs? Unheard of, especially back in the 80s. In this movie, they give it to us, though. Like, at the very beginning of the movie, there's a female electrical worker, and she may have been fodder for the killer, but at least she had a predominantly male job. I have to applaud the movie for this. Though there is that one questionable scene at the very beginning of the movie where all of them are taking a shower. I watched the documentary about 80s horror slasher movies. It's on Shudder if you ever want to give it a watch. Not sponsored by Shudder, but you know I want to. The director actually talks about why she had to put that scene in there, and it was just to please the predominantly male investors and all that kind of stuff, and to make sure they got an audience to come see the movie, because at the time the people who were watching the horror genre were mostly teenage to 20-something adult males, so you had to please the demographic of the genre that you were trying to make a film in. So she wanted to make a point with her movie. She wanted to make it so it seemed like it had more female empowerment in it, but she had to have certain scenes like that just to get the movie to be produced. So it's at the time that these movies were made, you had to really fight to shove in what you wanted. And not just fighting the ratings board to have good kills in your movie. It was also about the other themes that you were trying to portray with the movie that you were in. Okay, I'm done ranting and I'm on to the next movie. Jumping into 1983, let's kick it off with a fun movie to watch. Christine. Who doesn't love a killer car? Oops, I hope that wasn't a spoiler, even if you look at this poster for the movie. It's a great watch for a funny yet still kind of serious horror movie with some interesting kills. And the ending, I don't want to spoil it, but it's kind of unexpected and kind of fits the movie perfectly, in my opinion. It's a fun watch with some good actors, and oh boy, gotta love a killer car. One more movie for 1983 is another classic slasher, and that would be Sleepaway Camp. This movie, the first and best of the three in the series, just has unexpected twists and turns. And the ending will have you shook. I remember the first time I watched it, I thought I was on some crazy trip at the very end because I couldn't believe what I was seeing on the screen. It was that campy, but in a good way that makes the movie memorable for you and makes you want to watch it again. The movie also has really great classic slasher-like kills, very Friday the 13th-esque kind of kills, and it is a summer camp movie to boot. You'll actually find that a lot of horror movies from the 80s center around a summer camp slasher setting, and make no mistake in thinking that is because of the success of Friday the 13th, because you would be correct. But unlike some of those random and mostly unheard of slashers, Sleepaway Camp managed to make a name for itself because it's actually a fun movie to watch. So definitely give it a chance if you haven't already. Going into 1984, and no, not via George Orwell, just a little literature humor right there. Okay, I'll stop the puns. Yeah. We are, of course, talking about Wes Craven's masterpiece, A Nightmare on Elm Street. I've actually talked about this movie before on my podcast and in other videos. I really love this movie because it's so unique. And also so creepy because, and many of you may not know this unless you watch the documentary about Nightmare on Elm Street, but Wes Craven actually based this movie off of true events. He was well known for wanting to ground his horror movies into some sort of reality, just to make them seem more realistic, like to actually happen in real life. And sure, the movie plays with thoughts of demons and hell dimensions and possessions, but it is interesting to know that despite all of that, it's based off of people in real life actually dying in their sleep. So if you want to know more about this, I go in depth on my podcast, so you can check that out. As always, I leave a link in the description. And of course, go check out this movie if you haven't, because it's surprising. If you're into horror, I'd be concerned if you've never seen A Nightmare on Elm Street. One more movie for 1984 is Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter. And you might probably be yelling at me right now, Mercy, you already talked about a Friday movie. This isn't fair. Well, I cannot, in good conscience, my dear viewers, talk about 80s horror and not have this movie be on my list. Whereas the first Friday movie gave us the birth of the series, this one delivers some of the best moments of the franchise. It gave us Tommy Jarvis and a few other memorable cast members. It brought back Tom Savini to do the special effects that really made the kills for this movie fun to watch. And from a personal artist standpoint, I loved pausing the movie and looking in depth at the prosthetics and tearing it apart just to see how they were possible and how he would have made them. This movie belongs on this list, even if we already talked about the first Friday. People need to know that they have to see this if they haven't yet. Only two more left on this list, and our next one is from 1986. Now we're going to take a more musical route and talk about Little Shop of Horrors. This may be a lesser known movie for some of my viewers, even for the die-hard horror fans out there. This movie is like a dark comedy musical horror. It's fun and enjoyable with a stellar cast and some really great skits. And I say skits because it's more akin to an anthology type of movie where they have different acts, like you would go to the movies, or like go to the movie musicals in the theater, and you would see different portions of the show in acts. I'm not liable for any of you who go watch this and never want to visit the dentist again, though, so just a warning. But definitely check Little Shop of Horrors out. To finish off this list, we visit 1988 and talk Child's Play. I love this quirky, strange, and new take on a slasher. Do not mistake this gem for its subpar 2019 remake. That movie pales in comparison to this one. They say it's the classic is always better. Definitely applies here. This movie has the craziest origin story for a killer that involves rituals and possession. I do warn you that if you go down this rabbit hole of a series and watch more than just the first movie, be aware that it gets weirder and weirder as you go. But it's only in good reason. The original creators of the series, if you listen to them in interviews, they talk about how they developed the series through and through, like how they talked about how they wanted to do different kinds of movies and different takes on the series, but still have the same characters. And it really plays out interestingly. And if you want more good movies in the series, I definitely recommend the last two that they did before the subpart 2019 remake. They didn't actually have a part in that movie, and they were actually against making it. If you want to know more about that, I know that other channels like Dead Meat definitely talk about it when they do the kill count for it, but they didn't want that movie to be made, and they talk about why, and they also talk about how they developed the series as a whole. So Child's Play is really fun to watch. The other movies are weird, really weird, but really cool, and then the last two that they had made were fantastic as well. So definitely check out that series. If you don't know who Chucky is, you don't know horror. Now, that was our list of the top 10 horror movies of the 80s, and I have promised you, my listeners, my list of the top 5 worst horror movies of the 80s. So, let's do this, and please, this is just my opinion. Again, don't get too mad about it. Number 5, Prom Night. I was highly disappointed by this movie. It even had Jamie Lee Curtis herself, the queen of the final girls, in it, and it was still meh to me. The movie was too slow-paced. The kills weren't good at all, and the reveal was anticlimactic to me because the movie was so slow-paced. I tried to appreciate it for its time and when it was made, that time period, but there were so many other better movies from that time period that did this better. It's kind of like the movie just decided, hey, we got Jamie Lee Curtis. That's good enough. I mean, still watch it. It's okay, I suppose, if you really like Jamie Lee Curtis. She's great in this movie, but other than that, the movie just lacks everything for me as a slasher movie and as a horror movie. Number 4, Slumber Party Massacre 2. I can sum this up with, what even was that? I can't even describe. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever watched. The killer was so... What even? You gotta watch it to understand how bad it is, but it's maybe bad in a good way. I'm not sure of your opinion on that. Number 3, Microwave Massacre. With a title like that, do I even have to explain the plot? Number 2, Blood Diner. The strangest plot to a horror movie I have ever seen. At least it warns you how ridiculous the movie is at the beginning when you watch it. Thank you for the disclaimer. Number 1, Motel Hell. I know they were going with a Texas Chainsaw vibe, but it didn't pan out for them. It didn't. I was not a fan. Well, guys, that sums it up. These are some of the best and worst horror movies of the 80s. Don't forget to drop your own lists in the comments, or come at me if you think I'm wrong. I don't mind a little bit of opinion. As always, please give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and please, if you enjoy my content and want to know exactly when it comes out, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell if you are ever so inclined. Everyone have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all next time. Until then.